Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this session on what is operation resilience and how do I achieve it, a subject very close to my heart. My name is Phil Jackman and I lead on Cyber North, which is Dynamo's Northeast Cyber Security Cluster. So I'd like to introduce Gary Peterson and Stuart Birnie from, I think, WhyAye.
Fantastic, thanks very much. So welcome everybody to the session, and thank you very much for joining this morning. We really hope the session is going to be an informative, an interactive session, and we'd love to hear your input as we go through this morning's what we're calling a workshop. So we do want to absolutely encourage your participation. We're going to start with some introductions from myself, Gary, and Stuart. So I'm going to start with Stuart. If you'd like to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Gary, and good morning, everyone. My name is Stuart Birnie, and absolutely delighted to be here this morning. I have 20 years' experience working in this area with PwC and now with WhyAye. And in the last 12 months, I've been very fortunate to work with two global asset and wealth managers, a FTSE 50 insurer and a challenger bank. And in my past, I've also worked with a fire brigade, a local health authority, and various manufacturers, as well as producing papers of thought leadership. So as I say, absolutely delighted to be here. And as Gary says, let's make this an interactive session so that we can share our thoughts and insights.
Thanks, Stuart. Great. Nice to meet you all. My name's Gary Peterson. I've been in the IT industry now for 25 plus years. I tend to now round that number down a little bit, but I've been in IT for a long time. Today we're going to be talking about resilience, and one of my very early introductions to resilience was I worked for a major global bank that had an IT outage back in 2012, and we're going to touch upon IT today a little bit as a sort of core component of I think about we'd recognise all of our business operations to run. That IT incident was extremely serious, and I'll just give some context that it kind of took out the kind of personal banking capabilities of this organisation for about 7 days, and that created some challenging economic hardships for customers in that organisation. There was also around about £1 trillion worth of commercial payments queuing in IT systems for big companies like Shell and M&S and so on and so forth. And I think it was a really interesting sort of tipping point in my career, and I think also how organisations since then have moved forward to talk about resiliency and keeping their operations up and running. And that was a challenging time, but since then I've done lots of exciting stuff in the world of IT. And I've now been at WhyAye for about a year, and this is an area that we're really keen to talk about and focus on. So that's a little about me. Just before we dive into this, though, Stuart, as a fellow Scot, I do want to just check in with you on the football. What's your thoughts? Where are we at, and how is Scotland going to get on?
That's a really good question. I guess it's a diplomatic answer. I think England are obviously doing very well. There's room for improvement from a Scottish side, so you're really looking forward to tomorrow night and seeing what happens.
Great stuff. Okay, fantastic. I just wanted to also mention how to interact with the session today. We're really keen, as I say, to get your interaction in some of the conversations we're going to be having. We do have a couple of polls which we'll highlight when they come up and become available. So great to hear your thoughts and response to those poll questions. There's the online chat, so please do put your chat topics in the online facility. We'll come round to those at the end of the session, and if there's an opportunity to take some of those into a Q&A, then myself and Stuart will do our best to answer any questions, but ideally have a good discussion. And then there's the join video and audio capability. So again, if you're keen to come into the conversation, we'd love that. And Claire will facilitate joining the conversation through that capability. So yeah, let's get started. A couple of moments just by way of introduction to WhyAye. It's a term which will be very familiar to lots of people in the Northeast, but I just want to break it down a little bit as to what it means for us as an organisation, because we do get asked WhyAye. It's a bit of a bringing together of two terms actually. The why bit from WhyAye, which is a term I'm very familiar with now, spending a lot of time in the Northeast. Don't need to go into that one in too much detail. But the I part is actually a kind of Scottish term, which means yes. So why yes is the kind of breakdown of WhyAye, and what it really means is we like to ask questions in an organisation. We like to challenge. We like to understand what customers are looking for in terms of outcome. And the yes piece is really that we do sort of drive those outcomes and those solutions for our customers. So So that's a little bit about WhyAye. We get asked a lot about that. Our mantra is to put the yay into everybody's working day. We believe that experiences of using systems, IT, technology at home should be replicated in your 9 to 5. So we look at systems and deliver systems that are very much focused around that experiential side. We're strong believers that IT should be an enabler to making work more fun, shall we say. And I think we've already had a lot of experience of using IT systems over the last 12 months, certainly, with the pandemic, etc. So yeah, that's a little bit about WhyAye. We like to have a bit of fun, but we do work hard, and we're definitely very focused on those customer outcomes. So, without further ado, Stuart, can you give us an outline of what actually is resilience?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Gary, because there are different elements of resilience which I'll talk about in a second, and people use different terminology based on what the threat is. But ultimately, what resilience is about is preventing, adapting, responding, and recovering. And that's how the UK financial services regulator like to describe it. And we like to add another one to that, which is learn. So as you go through that journey, learning and improving your processes. So let me start with the different components of resilience. And the first one is financial resilience. And financial resilience is really about structuring your organisation so that you can absorb any impacts that might ultimately hit your cash flow. So this could be a global financial crisis, as we've all lived through. If you're working in financial services, a change in interest rates, or if you're in any industry, a customer not paying or a customer not paying at all. So how do you absorb those threats so it doesn't cause you a significant incident? The second area of resilience is operating model resilience. And this is really interesting because it's quite broad. And I'm going to pick out two of the sort of main areas that fall under this. The first one's geopolitical. And that can be anything from a change in government and what that might mean to your business, depending on what country you're working in. It might mean a change in government policy. So, if you're a dentist and the government suddenly withdraws free dental care, you might want to think about how you plan and adapt for that situation. And then the other area of operating model resilience is customer behaviour. And we've all seen the move over the last few years where we've moved towards internet shopping, where we've seen the digitisation of music and video, and organisations like HMV or Kodak or others have had to adapt to that. And those that have done it successfully have seen success, and those that haven't adapted have suffered. And then the final area, which is what we're talking about today, is operational resilience. So that's threats like pandemics, which we're living through at the moment, natural disasters, fires, floods, etc. And then a subset of that is digital resilience, which is really common and I'm sure everyone's familiar with. So that's cyber. So we've seen last week the computer games company WhyAye had a cyber attack. They're becoming more and more common. But digital resilience also encompasses things like change. So we've seen with TSB where they were migrating policy systems that caused an outage that had an impact on the customer. So digital resilience covers all of these different threats.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Stuart. That's really helpful. Thanks. So with that in mind, could you give the guys an indication of why ultimately organisations should focus on resilience? Why is it so important?
Yeah. Quite simply, the customer expects it. We, as the customer, expect it. In all industries, customer expects services to be available consistently. I use that word deliberately. We will tolerate a little disruption if we're communicated with, but if it's long-term and persistent, we'll look for alternative suppliers. And this applies in all industries, whether it's it's getting cash out an ATM or phoning up to book a boiler service or going shopping on the internet. We as customers expect that consistent service. And as we've moved more and more to technology that are enabling these customer processes, and we've seen impacts that can be very large and very disrupting to the customer. And with social media now, that impact can be communicated really, really quickly, which means that it has an impact on the reputation of the firm quickly, which again can have an impact on ultimately sales that are coming through. So why would you bother? You know, what are the benefits that can be realised from operational resilience? So on the slide, there's a number that are there, and I'm going to pick out a couple and I'll sort of amalgamate them a little bit together. And this first one is the most important for me. You move to this brilliant position where you're proactively identifying and managing potential threats before they actually occur. So you're reducing both the likelihood and the impact of any potential incident. And that means you're increasing confidence and trust with your customers, and that can ultimately mean you get that larger share if you're in that industry, or if you're in public services, you're delivering that service that the customer expects. You know, there are many reasons that digital companies like Netflix and Amazon are successful, but one of them is because they provide this reliable service, and that's because they invest in resilience. And the second one I'll pick out, because I can see everyone will be wanting me to talk about it because it's front and centre of the slide, is this point on cost efficiencies. And for me, that's twofold. Firstly, the cost of disruption can be absolutely huge. So by making this investment in resilience up front, hopefully you avoid that. And secondly, if you do this right and you get all areas of the business working together, you break down silos, and that removes the duplication. So your technology team are working with your business team, working with your risk team, and things are done once and they're done correctly the first time.
Super, thanks, Stuart. That's really helpful. Okay, so we're going to talk about some practical ways of how we would go around considering the resilience position. We're going to come up with some tips on how you guys can potentially get started, or if you're already on the journey, where to go next. I do want to just also highlight that the first poll should be available. So please do interact with that, and we'll come back round and talk about that in terms of the results in a few moments. So in terms of those top tips, for me, I'm going to kick off, Stuart, if that's okay. I'm going to talk about the business involvement in resiliency. So for me, and I think, Stuart, you've highlighted it perfectly, is impacts to organisations tend to be company-wide and can have very detrimental effects. So it's really important to have your resiliency agenda business-led. So involve your leadership team, make sure that the wider community within your organisations are aware of your actions. Use the governance models that you already have in place. You may already have risk forums, you may already talk about resiliency or operations in a number of the ways that you run your own business. Use those forums to start to foster the conversation around resilience. And the final point from me around this is about getting your people involved. Ultimately, a lot of this stuff is a business change activity. Getting your teams involved and contributing to those outcomes is a great way of engaging your wider colleague base in terms of that change initiative. So that's my tips around a business-led approach. Sure, I think you've got a couple more.
Yeah, I think from a business-led approach, the one thing I would say on business-led, and reiterating what you said, Gary, is making sure you involve all areas of the business. This should not be technology driven on its own. It should be the business doing it on their own. This is about understanding those key customer outcomes and then focusing on those accordingly.
Okay, and did you have a couple more that you wanted to add in?
Yeah, so let me talk about the customer focus side of things, and then maybe we can go to the results of the first poll. So, you know, the customer focus side of things, what do I mean by that? And basically, you can't plan for everything. There's not enough hours in the day. And too many organisations try to plan for every eventuality, which is not efficient at all. So if you focus on what your customer outcomes are, you focus on the processes that deliver these outcomes, and really think about the threats that you face, and that can give you a real head start. And to bring it to life, customer outcomes are things like, being able to lift cash from an ATM, being able to make a payment, or, being able to deliver the goods and service to the end customer. So what are those outcomes you're delivering? What are the threats, and really focusing on them. And then once you understand that customer outcome, think about the impact if they're unavailable. And financial services, through the regulations that have come out, are starting to talk about this as an impact tolerance. And that's thinking about if you had an incident right now, after how many seconds, minutes, hours, days, would you have an impact that caused significant customer detriment? And if done properly, this gives you a great planning tool for resilience. So for example, if you determine the unavailability of your customer outcome, whatever it might be, and causes significant customer detriment after 15 minutes, you need to plan and invest so that you can have resilience, so that you avoid that significant detriment. And everyone in the call will be clever enough to work out that that's pretty important. And being the Scotsman in me, I can say that if you were to get that wrong, and it's actually 30 minutes, you're going to be investing a lot of money to make it 15 minutes when it's actually 30 minutes. And that's going to cost you money. And then the third and final point I would say on the customer focused is, once you've understood your customer outcomes, once you've understood the processes that deliver them, once you've understood what this impact is, then test. Test your ability to recover before this impact tolerance hits. Use this term of severe but plausible scenarios using real data. That doesn't mean switching off services, because it'd be rather embarrassing if you caused an incident through a DR test. But what it does mean is thinking about it, doing a robust test that really proves your capability to recover, with a second benefit that by doing these tests, you're training all the people in your organisation and your senior leadership team on how to respond. So, probably the poll.
Yes,
have a look at
great
the
tips, Stuart.
results.
Thank you very much. Very, very helpful. Yeah, let's have a look and see what we've got coming through on the poll.
See if we can see results. I don't know. No polls are up yet.
Polls are up.
Well, why don't I talk about the third and tip while we're in the background? We see if we
Yeah.
can get this working.
We'll try and get the polls up while Stuart takes us through the third point.
And the third point is on technology, and it's good to see that in a resilience session that people are using their technology resilience, because I can see in the chat that people have been having trouble with the video, etc. They're trouble with the polls. So listen, we'll just react to this and we'll go with it. But the point on technology, I guess there's a few elements to technology when you're thinking about operational resilience. And the first point is, I come back to the benefits that I talked about at the outset, and that is, from op resilience, you want to deliver timely MI, so you can be forward-looking and anticipate incidents and manage things, so that you don't have that big incident impacting on you. You can't do this if you're trying to collect data from multiple sources. It's also really expensive and inefficient to maintain Word and Excel. So genuinely, investing in tooling can be helpful. And in my experience, if you really think about it, you can justify a business case to do it. My second point on technology might seem blindingly obvious when I say it, but that's making sure that the business and technology requirements are aligned. The business need to tell the technology team how quickly they need a process recovered. And technology teams then need to make sure they understand all of the different components of technology that deliver that process that's delivering the outcome. So, the desktops, the servers, what's in the cloud, the applications, making sure that lineage is understood and it's all recoverable within the business requirements. And if it's not, then a conversation is had and decisions are made on what can be done. Way too often go into organisations and see that there's just this misalignment between what historically would have been called disaster recovery requirements and these business continuity requirements. And then the third and final point under technology is Operational resilience should not be a tick box exercise you do once and forget about. As we've said, it should be business driven, not technology led. You want to build this into your DNA and use as a competitive advantage. So don't forget about business change. Think about how you build this into roles, responsibility, performance management, compliance, etc., so that it really sticks within your organisation.
Fabulous, Stuart. Thank you so much. Really good advice there. Okay, so we've got the poll results in. Thanks, guys, for being patient whilst that came through. I'm just peering forward at the screen here, but it looks promising. So I think in the first question, we've got most organisations are considering resilience to be a strategic priority. That's good. That's great news. And some organisations recognise the importance, but it's maybe just not the ultimate focus as it stands today. That's fine, but good to see people are starting to think about it. And not seen as a priority at all is 0 votes, which is fantastic. So that's really good to see. Again, just to encourage you guys, if you wanted to jump in on the conversation, to click your join audio and video to discuss these results. But I think, Stuart, they look quite promising from the votes we had.
They certainly do, and it's probably reflective of our experiences as well. I think, when I look at UK PLC as a whole, those industries that are regulated tend to be more focused on this. So, financial services, energy and utilities, and then, after that, it's a little bit further behind in terms of some of the other organisations. But the key bit I would say is that, on the whole, there has been this realisation over the last 3 to 5 years that we are making everything technology enabled. Disruptions can be severe, so we need to invest in resilience. And I think that the poll results reflect that, which is great to see.
Good. And then in terms of the second poll, again, very encouraging. It looks like the majority of respondents recognise that there is a plan in place. Which is great. So again, that's very promising in terms of that response, and even the remainder of the response have partially got plans in place. It sounds like it's work in progress.
Yeah,
which is again good.
It is. It's really good. It's really encouraging that there's no no's in there. I think one of my reflections is I've been fortunate. I don't know if that's the right word, over the course of my career to do a number of lessons learned exercises. Where there have been big incidents at organisations, and I can safely say that at least 90% of those organisations, when I went in, they were aware of the risk that ultimately materialised into an issue and caused the incident. It was things like obsolete IT equipment or single points of failure with suppliers. They were aware of these things. They just hadn't done anything about it. It had been put in a risk register, and hadn't been properly thought through in terms of, well, how do we actually mitigate that? How do we actually respond to that if it should happen? So to see that the people here today are doing that is really, really good.
Okay, great stuff. So we'll keep going. Just as a reminder, if you do want to just interact with that part of the conversation, then please do click on your audio and video buttons. But just whilst we're waiting on that, just to cover off some of the, I suppose, the pointers that we can offer in terms of a framework. Stuart, we've, hopefully it's come across that we experienced working with organisations across an array of different industry sectors around the resilience conversation. So, this is a busy slide, but it really encapsulates the suggestion around a framework of how to approach that resilience journey. And it sounds like from the poll, Stuart, that people are already on this journey. They've moved along these arrows and they're starting to think about it, which is fantastic. My interpretation of this framework, and there's no blueprint to this. It's something that we find organisations need to work through. But let me just cover the points that Stuart touched upon at the start of the conversation. The prevent piece. Try and avoid bad things happening. It's a very obvious thing to say, but if you can avoid that customer impact and the reputational damage that may entail, then that's the best place to start. Adapting and responding is that. What are those market trends? Stuart touched upon those in terms of the way governments change policy, licensing, regulation, banking policy, interest rates, financial, etc. There's a whole range of different external factors to adapt to and respond from. Recover, I think, very positive response in terms of the amount of organisations there that have definitely got strong plans, and the other community that are definitely looking at it. So nobody so far is calling out that they haven't even started that planning activity to recover from those incidents as and when they happen. And then that kind of learning cycle. So this is something that's going to be with us as we move into this highly digital era, for as far as the eye can see. So that learning loop around picking up, those policy statements, the way that the customers are wanting to respond and interact with your services, again, as you touched upon, Stuart, is another really good way of defining that as part of the framework. So, do you have anything else that you want to pick out there, Stuart?
I think that, just what the white boxes are, and I appreciate they're really, really busy, and I hope that is helpful, because effectively that's the steps to go through, some of which we've touched on as we've went through the conversation. So, focusing on the customer outcomes, what are the threats, testing it, etc. And if I maybe pull out the couple of key points for me and my experience of doing this over the course of my career. And the first one I've said quite a lot is focus on your customer outcomes, really understand what they are, really understand what the processes are that deliver those outcomes, and what are the threats that you face. And I come back to my point about you can't plan for everything. So by doing that prioritization, you're really focusing on what's important to you. The second point, and I kind of referred to it when I introduced it, and I say test deliberately, because hopefully it sticks in people's brains, but the test bit is so important. Really thinking about the data and really thinking about the scenario so that you can prove your capability to recover. And that secondary benefit, don't think not even a secondary, it's a primary benefit as well, about training your team. When you actually sit down and start thinking about this and run through with senior leadership, you're building that capability. So if an incident should happen, you know how to respond, and you've actually thought it through. And then the third and final bit we've talked about a heck of a lot through this conversation is make sure it's a whole organisation thing. It's not just technology, it's not the business on their own, or it's not people in silos. People are working together, and that's where that business change piece comes in, which is so important.
Marvellous, thanks, Stuart. Great stuff. And we will be sharing these slides, or this slide specifically, because there is a lot of information on there, certainly post the event. So we'll make that happen after we're finished. Super, thanks, Stuart. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I think we're done in terms of the content we wanted to cover. Thank you very much for joining. We do want to open up for Q&A. So again, just as a final reminder, if there's anybody that wants to hit their join button, or if there's anything in the chat that you think we need to pick up.
Yeah, there's a
question there from Stuart to you, Stuart.
Stuart to Stuart.
Yeah.
So let me just read it out, and then I'll give you my perspective on it. So how will organisations be convinced to invest and prepare to develop resilience when it costs money now for a future event that may or may not happen? And that's an absolutely great question.
Brilliant.
That's an absolute belter, because I think what's happened in the regulated industries is the regulators come along with a stick, and that's what's making organisations think about it. I think where organisations that maybe don't have that pressure from a regulator, why would they bother, and how would they justify it? I think we justify it by bringing in that operational risk angle. So what you're really thinking about there is, what are my risks? What are my controls? How do I prevent this from happening? And how do I then respond from it? So if you bring the disciplines together of cyber, change management, operational risk management, third-party risk management. So to come back to what Gary was talking about, you're identifying, you're preventing it, you're responding from it, you're bringing these disciplines together, you get the efficiencies that allow you to justify a business case. And then I guess ultimately, and from production, when you actually start analysing some of these, you know, and I'll name names because it's all publicly available, but you know, your RBSs, your Tesco's, your TSBs, and you look at the cost of these organisations, and these are not once in a lifetime events. These are events that are happening on a regular basis. So by making that investment, you're mitigating that risk.
Great. And I think I'd just add to that, Stuart, to your question, which I think is a fantastic question, is there's something behind this around the data that organisations use to create that landscape of resiliency. There's a huge amount of value in that data, not just for this particular topic, but in terms of how organisations prioritise future investment, how you start to bring together some of the pillars within organisations, so operations, IT, property, etc. What we're seeing is that the value of having a consistent data model and having that data in a single system, for example, organisations are using that very powerfully to help them inform future strategic decisions, as well as helping to manage the overall landscape around resilience. So it's a great question, and there's many business cases, I'm sure, at the moment getting a lot of scrutiny around the investment required for that. So thanks for that. Is there anything else in the Q&A? If not, I think we're good to go.
Hi, team.
Hi, Jordan.
Hey. So, just for everybody else in the call, I'm a fellow WhyAye here. Gareth, I think you probably caught the point that I was coming on to just feed into Stuart's question there about, it's about seeing how operational resilience can benefit other areas of the organisation, but also how they can take advantage. So there will be other things going on in the organisation that are already doing some of the work that will benefit your operational resilience programme. So for example, you may already be kind of mapping your operational process out, and that's something that's very valuable in understanding operational resilience of those processes or services, which is great. You're not having to invest as much as you potentially think. I suppose it's one I just throw out to you guys on the panel. I'll try and help get things along. You know, typically we've got big massive organizations that we've obviously worked with, and we've got some smaller ones again that may be on the call here. What does a typical investment look like, or is there a set of stages that you might go through in maturity that try and help you get to keep those costs manageable as we go through the development of your operational resilience programme?
Yeah, good question, Jordan. Let me give you my perspective. A strap line I would use to initially answer that is, and you touched on it, which is don't reinvent the wheel. You know, I'm sure as organisations you have risk and control frameworks, you might have process maps associated with that, you might have implemented a new system and you've got process maps, you might have done X, Y, and Z, which has allowed you to understand your customer outcomes, understand what your risks is. So reuse this information. Don't think this has to be, you know, something you start from scratch. And by doing that and spending a wee bit of time up front doing that, you know, in my experience, that helps in terms of that cost profile for investment. And that analysis is normally just people time to do that. The big investment tends to come, you know, you get to the end of that and you've said, right, you know, here's my customer outcome, here's the processes that deliver them. I will have an impact of X, but I can't recover within that impact. So what do I do about that? And that could mean, you know, investing in redundant systems, but it could also mean writing continuity plans to maybe do things manually. So to answer your question in terms of how do you keep the costs as low as possible, don't reinvent the wheel and actually take the time to analyse the business.
I suppose just for what it's worth, my tuppence worth, what we've seen a lot of organisations do is kind of take that iterative approach. It's continuous learning, and I think Gary picked up on that at the beginning. It's probably the piece that we see as being one of the most important is, you know, try something out, get a small area of the organisation, put a bit of a framework together, some methodologies, try it out there, learn from that, and based on whether you're getting the right outcomes or whether you need to adapt, then at some point decide when's the right point to scale that across the rest of the organisation. And we see that a lot with people using pilots, for example, in some of the organisations we work with, and that gives its weight in worth. It's worth its weight in gold, I think, is the expression that we use in terms of that feedback, and it should be the same in anything that you're producing and inventing.
Great, thanks, Jordan. So I don't think there's any more questions coming through, but we have got our contact details there on the screen. So on that topic or any other topics that folks want to reach out to us and have a conversation about, then we're more than happy to do that. That's one area that's certainly of a lot of interest, and it's something that we are working with organisations with around that justification of the cost profile and making sure that it's a wisely placed investment decision. I think Stuart's painted that picture quite clearly today, that it's something to look at, and it's good to see from the poll results that that's actually happening. So that's absolutely fantastic. It would be great to continue chatting, but I think we're just about at time. We might even be able to give you a few moments back to catch a coffee break in between the next session. So lovely to see you all, and thanks very much for joining. And as I say, please do get in touch if you want to have a further conversation. Otherwise, we'll make sure the information comes your way once we've wrapped up. And thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.